The cellophane crinkled like autumn leaves as I watched Nora unwrap another bouquet through our kitchen window. Same time, same day, same expensive orchids that cost more than most people spend on groceries. Friday afternoon, 3:15 on the dot, delivered by the same courier who probably knew our address better than the mailman. Office culture, she'd said the first time, back when I still believed her explanations came with good intentions attached. Miles appreciates hard work. Miles Harren, CEO of Harren Industries, where my wife Nora Marlin worked as a corporate finance manager. 40-something, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore $1,000 suits like armor and treated everyone beneath his tax bracket like furniture. I'd met him exactly twice at company events. Both times he'd looked through me like I was window glass. Every Friday? I'd asked that first time, 18 months ago. The whole department gets them, she'd replied, not meeting my eyes as she arranged the stems in our good crystal vase. Team building. 18 months of Fridays. 78 weeks of orchids. I'd counted because counting things was what I did for a living. Or used to, back when I worked for the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division. Now I designed landscapes for suburban homeowners who wanted their yards to look like magazine covers. The pay was decent, the work was honest, and nobody tried to have me transferred to Alaska when I asked too many questions. But old habits die hard, and pattern recognition was burned into my brain like a brand. The courier handed Nora the flowers with the same professional smile he'd worn every Friday for over a year. She signed for them on the electronic pad, her wedding ring catching the afternoon sunlight. The same ring I'd slipped onto her finger 6 years ago, back when she'd promised to love, honor, and cherish me through whatever came next. What came next, apparently, was Miles Heron and his Friday tradition. I stepped back from the window as Nora turned toward the house. No point letting her know I was watching. Not yet. Instead, I walked to my home office, a converted bedroom where I kept my computer, my landscaping files, and a growing collection of observations that probably meant nothing. Probably. The front door opened with its familiar squeak. "Evan, I'm home." "In here," I called back, opening a new document on my computer. Time to add Friday number 78 to my list. Nora appeared in the doorway, still holding the orchids. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. Dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, gray business suit that fit her like it was tailored, which it probably was. Her salary at Harren Industries was almost double what I made, a fact she never let me forget during our increasingly frequent arguments about money. "Another team-building exercise?" I asked, nodding toward the flowers. She rolled her eyes. "You know how corporate culture works, Evan. Appreciation goes a long way toward employee retention." "Must be some team. How many people in your department again?" "You know this. 12 people, including me." She turned to leave, then paused. "Why do you keep asking about the flowers?" "Because they're expensive. Because they're personal. Because team building doesn't usually involve weekly deliveries to someone's home address. Because I spent 8 years investigating financial crimes, and I know the difference between legitimate business expenses and something else entirely." "Just curious," I said instead. "They're beautiful." She smiled, the same smile that had made me fall in love with her back in college. "I'll put them in water. Dinner in an hour? Sounds good?" She left, and I heard her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she walked to the kitchen. The sound faded, replaced by running water and the soft clink of crystal. I turned back to my computer and opened a new browser window. Time for a little research. Harren Industries had a website, naturally. Corporate headquarters downtown, 300 employees, annual revenue in the low 9 figures. Miles Harren's biography read like a textbook example of American business success. MBA from Wharton, 20 years climbing the corporate ladder, married to socialite Tessa Harren, no children. His photo showed a man who looked like he'd never doubted himself about anything. I clicked through to the company's news section. Press releases, earnings reports, the usual corporate propaganda. Nothing about team building or employee appreciation programs, nothing about flowers. But there was something else. A society page photo from the city's business journal, dated 3 months ago. Miles and Tessa Heron at some charity gala, posed in front of a backdrop covered with sponsor logos. He wore a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. She wore diamonds that probably cost more than my house. They looked like the perfect power couple. They also looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but standing next to each other. I bookmarked the page and closed the browser. Dinner smells were starting to drift from the kitchen, something with garlic and herbs that made my stomach rumble. Nora was a good cook when she had time, which wasn't often these days. Too many late nights at the office, too many weekend conferences, too many business trips that seemed to coincide with Miles Harren's travel schedule. Another pattern, if you knew how to look for it. "Evan, Dinner's ready. I saved my work and headed for the kitchen. The orchids sat in their crystal vase on the counter, purple and white petals arranged with professional precision. They were beautiful, I had to admit. They were also the kind of flowers a man sent to a woman when he wanted to make an impression. The kind of flowers that had nothing to do with office culture. Nora had changed out of her business suit into jeans and a sweater. She looked younger, more like the woman I'd married. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. Almost. "How was your day?" she asked, setting plates on our small dining table. "Good. Finished the Morrison project. They want me to bid on their neighbor's yard, too." I sat down across from her, inhaling the aroma of chicken marsala. "How about you?" "Busy. Always busy." She took a sip of wine, a bottle I didn't remember buying. "Miles has us working on a new acquisition. Could mean big bonuses if it goes through." "That's great." I cut a piece of chicken, chewed it slowly. He seems like a generous boss. Something flickered across her face, too quick to identify. "He takes care of his people." "I'm sure he does." We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. This was nice, I thought. This was what marriage was supposed to feel like. Two people sharing a meal, talking about their days, planning for the future. Then Nora's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and that flicker crossed her face again. This time I recognized it. Guilt, mixed with something that might have been excitement. "Work?" I asked. "Just a text, nothing important." She set the phone face down on the table, but not before I caught a glimpse of the sender's name. Miles. "You sure? It's after hours." "Corporate finance never sleeps." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You know how it is." I knew how it used to be, back when I worked cases that kept me up until 3 a.m, chasing paper trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. But I'd never texted my colleagues at 8 o'clock on a Friday night. I'd never sent them flowers either. "Maybe you should take a vacation," I suggested. "When's the last time we went somewhere together?" "Soon," she said, the same answer she'd been giving me for months. "Once this acquisition closes, things will calm down." Her phone buzzed again. This time she didn't look at it, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. "You should answer that," I said. "Might be important." "It can wait." But her eyes kept drifting to the phone, and I could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. Whatever Miles Heron was texting her about, it wasn't business. At least, not the kind of business that involved quarterly reports and acquisition strategies. After dinner, Nora disappeared into our bedroom with her laptop, claiming she had work to catch up on. I cleaned the dishes and tried not to think about the patterns I was seeing. Tried not to remember the skills I'd learned during my years with Treasury, the instincts that had made me good at following paper trails and connecting dots that other people missed. But some habits are harder to break than others. I waited until I heard the shower running, then I did something I'd never done before in 6 years of marriage. I picked up Nora's phone. It was password protected, naturally. But I'd watched her enter the code hundreds of times. Her birthday, same as always. The screen unlocked, and I navigated to her text messages. Miles Heron's name was at the top of the list. My hands were shaking as I opened the conversation thread. The messages went back months, maybe longer. Most of them were innocuous enough. Meeting confirmations, work-related questions, the occasional joke about office politics. But scattered throughout were others that made my stomach clench. "Looking forward to our lunch meeting tomorrow." The hotel confirmed our reservation. "You looked beautiful today." "Can't stop thinking about you." I scrolled back further, watching the messages grow more intimate, more explicit. There were photos too, nothing graphic, but enough to make their relationship crystal clear. Nora in a restaurant I didn't recognize. Nora in a hotel room that definitely wasn't ours. Nora wearing lingerie I'd never seen before. The shower was still running. I had maybe 5 more minutes before she came out. I scrolled to the very beginning of their text thread, looking for the first message. It was dated 19 months ago, just a few weeks before the Friday flowers started arriving. "Welcome to the team, Nora. Looking forward to working closely with you." Her response, "Thank you, Mr. Heron. I won't let you down." His reply, "Please, call me Miles, and I'm sure you won't." I closed the messages and checked her email next. Her work account was synced to the phone, and it didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Hotel confirmations, restaurant reservations, expense reports for client meetings that never appeared on her calendar. All of it carefully documented, all of it pointing to the same conclusion. My wife was having an affair with her boss, had been having an affair for over a year and a half, and I'd been too trusting, too naive, too focused on my own work to see what was happening right in front of me. The shower stopped. I quickly closed her email, deleted the browser history, and set the phone back where I'd found it. By the time Nora emerged from the bathroom in her robe, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to watch television. "Find anything good?" she asked, toweling her hair dry. "Just the news," I said, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I said more. She settled beside me on the couch, smelling like her expensive shampoo and the perfume I'd given her for Christmas, the same perfume she'd apparently been wearing to hotel rooms with Miles Harren. "Evan," she said softly, "is everything okay? You seem distant lately." I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd loved for 8 years, the woman I'd planned to grow old with, the woman who'd been lying to my face for the better part of 2 years. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." She nodded, accepting the lie as easily as I'd been accepting hers. "I might have to work this weekend. Miles wants the acquisition report finished by Monday." "Of course he does." If she noticed the edge in my voice, she didn't comment on it. Instead, she curled up against my side, her head on my shoulder, and we watched the news together like a normal married couple, like people who trusted each other. But trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. And as I sat there with my cheating wife pressed against me, I started thinking about patterns again, about cause and effect, about the kinds of things that happened when people thought they were smarter than everyone around them. Miles Heron sent my wife flowers every Friday. Maybe it was time I sent some flowers of my own. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made you want to stay in bed and pretend the world didn't exist. But I'd been awake since 4:30, staring at the ceiling and thinking about hotel reservations and text messages and the way Nora's face had looked when she lied to me about working late. She was still asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her pillow. In the dim morning light, she looked innocent, peaceful. It was hard to reconcile this image with the woman who'd been carrying on an affair for 18 months. I slipped out of bed quietly and padded to the kitchen in my bare feet. Coffee first, then I'd figure out what to do with the information I'd discovered. The orchids from yesterday sat on the counter, their purple and white petals beginning to show the first signs of wilting. By Wednesday, they'd be gone, replaced the following Friday by a fresh bouquet. The pattern would continue unless I did something to break it. I made coffee and took my mug to the home office, closing the door behind me. My computer hummed to life, and I opened a new document. Time to do what I did best, follow the paper trail. Harren Industries' corporate filings were public record, available through the state's business registration database. I pulled up their annual reports, tax documents, anything that might give me insight into Miles Harren's business practices. What I found was interesting, if not immediately useful. The company was profitable, but not spectacularly so. Revenue had grown steadily over the past 5 years, but so had expenses. Executive compensation was high. Miles paid himself nearly $2 million annually, plus bonuses and stock options. For a company Harren Industries' size, that was aggressive but not illegal. But there were some curious line items in the expense reports. Consulting fees that didn't correspond to any outside contractors I could identify. Marketing expenses that seemed unusually high for a company that did most of its business through direct sales. Travel and entertainment, costs that had tripled since Nora joined the company. None of it was smoking gun evidence, but it painted a picture of a man who was comfortable using company resources for personal purposes. The kind of man who might think he could have an affair with an employee and face no consequences. I was about to dig deeper when I heard footsteps in the hallway. "Evan?" Nora's voice, thick with sleep. "You're up early." I minimized the browser window and opened a landscaping design program instead. Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd work on the Henderson project. She appeared in the doorway wearing my old college t-shirt and a pair of shorts. Her hair was messy, her face puffy from sleep, and she looked more like the woman I'd fallen in love with than she had in months. "Hey, it's Saturday," she said, stifling a yawn. "You should relax." Says the woman who's working this weekend. Something flickered across her face, that same guilty expression I'd noticed at dinner. "About that. Miles moved up the deadline. I need to go into the office this afternoon." "On Saturday?" I know, but it's important." She walked over and put her hands on my shoulders, massaging the tension I hadn't realized was there. "I'll make it up to you, I promise." Her touch felt good, familiar. For a moment, I almost forgot about the text messages and hotel reservations. Almost. "Will Miles be there too?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Probably. You know how he is about these big projects." I knew exactly how he was. I was starting to understand Miles Harren very well. "Okay," I said. "I'll probably work in the garden anyway. The roses need pruning." She kissed the top of my head. "You and your roses. I swear you love them more than you love me." If only she knew how wrong she was. After breakfast, Nora disappeared into our bedroom to get ready for her work session. I heard the shower running, the hairdryer humming, the sounds of a woman preparing to see her lover. She emerged an hour later looking polished and professional, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. "New outfit?" I asked. "This old thing? I've had it forever." Another lie, delivered with the same casual confidence as all the others. "I'll probably be late. Don't wait up." She kissed my cheek and left, her heels clicking against the driveway as she walked to her car. I watched from the window as she backed out and drove away, probably toward downtown, probably toward Miles Heron. But I wasn't going to spend the day wondering. I was going to find out for sure. 20 minutes later, I was parked across the street from Harren Industries' corporate headquarters, a gleaming glass tower that reflected the gray sky like a mirror. Nora's car was in the parking garage, along with a black Mercedes that probably belonged to Miles. At least she hadn't lied about coming to the office. I waited for an hour, watching the building's entrance, but neither of them emerged. Whatever they were doing up there, it was keeping them busy. I drove home and spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden, trimming roses and trying not to dwell on what my wife might be doing high above the city. The physical labor felt grounding, almost calming. There was a quiet satisfaction in cutting back spent growth, in shaping something graceful from what had grown wild and unruly. By evening, I'd made a decision. If Nora wanted to play games, I could play games too, but I was going to play them better than she was. Sunday passed quietly. Nora slept late, claiming exhaustion from her work session. We had brunch together, read the newspaper, watched a movie on television. It felt almost normal, except for the weight of everything I wasn't saying. Monday morning brought the first test of my resolve. Nora left for work at her usual time, kissing me goodbye and reminding me about dinner with her parents that evening. I waited 30 minutes, then drove to an electronics store across town, one where nobody would recognize me. "I need to clone a phone," I told the teenager behind the counter. He looked at me suspiciously. "That's not really something we—" "It's my wife's phone," I explained. "She's been getting threatening messages from her ex-boyfriend. I want to monitor her communications to make sure she's safe." The lie came easily, probably because it contained just enough truth to be believable. The kid's expression softened. "Oh man, that's rough. Yeah, I can help you out." An hour later, I walked out with a device that would let me mirror Nora's phone to my computer. All I needed was 5 minutes alone with her phone, and I'd have access to everything: texts, emails, photos, call logs, GPS tracking data. That evening, while Nora was in the shower getting ready for dinner, I connected her phone to the cloning device. It took less than 3 minutes to copy everything. Dinner with her parents was torture. We sat in their suburban dining room, making small talk about work and weather and the neighbors' new landscaping. Nora's mother asked when we were going to give her grandchildren. Nora's father complained about his golf game. I smiled and nodded and tried to act like a normal son-in-law while my wife sat beside me, probably thinking about Miles Heron. "You're quiet tonight, Evan," Nora's mother observed over dessert. "Everything all right?" "Just tired," I said, the same excuse I'd been using for weeks. "Busy season for landscaping." "Well, you work too hard. Both of you do." She patted Nora's hand affectionately. "You need to take better care of each other." If only she knew. We drove home in comfortable silence, Nora humming along with the radio. She seemed relaxed, happy even. Maybe the guilt was getting easier to live with, or maybe she'd just gotten better at compartmentalizing her two lives. That night, after she fell asleep, I crept back to my office and connected the cloning device to my computer. Within minutes, I had complete access to her digital life. The text messages were worse than I'd imagined. Miles wasn't just her boss and lover. He was possessive, demanding, controlling. He told her what to wear, where to go, how to act. He criticized her performance in bed and compared her to other women he'd been with. He made jokes about me, calling me the landscaper and your little husband. But Nora seemed to enjoy the dynamic. Her responses were eager, submissive, grateful for his attention. She told him she loved him. She said she was planning to ask me for a divorce. She promised him things that made my stomach turn. The email trail was even more damning. Hotel reservations going back almost 2 years, expense reports for business trips that were actually romantic getaways, credit card statements showing purchases at lingerie stores and expensive restaurants. And then I found something that made everything else pale in comparison. Buried in a folder labeled Personal Finance was a document I recognized, a copy of my pension plan from my Treasury Department days. The same pension plan I'd rolled into a private retirement account when I left government service, the account that represented almost every penny I'd saved for our future. According to the document, Nora had been researching how to access those funds in the event of a divorce. She'd consulted with a lawyer about asset division. She'd even opened a separate bank account, one I knew nothing about, where she'd been stashing money for months. She wasn't just having an affair, she was planning to leave me and take everything I'd worked for with her. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Systematic, calculated theft, planned and executed by the woman I'd trusted with my life. But two could play that game. I opened a new document and began typing. Time to put my Treasury Department training to work. Time to follow the money and see where it led. Because if there was one thing I'd learned during my years investigating financial crimes, it was this. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone leaves a trail. And if you know how to look, you can always find the evidence you need. Miles Heron thought he was smarter than me. He thought he could steal my wife, destroy my marriage, and walk away without consequences. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Tuesday morning brought sunshine and the kind of crisp air that made you believe winter might actually end someday. I was in my garden by 7, pruning the climbing roses that covered our back fence when my phone rang. Evan Mercer. Mr. Mercer, this is Janet Walsh from Henderson Properties. I hope I'm not calling too early. Janet Walsh, the client whose backyard renovation had been my biggest project this season. Not at all, Mrs. Walsh. What can I do for you? Well, I was talking to my neighbor yesterday. Tessa Heron? She lives in the big colonial on Maple Street. Anyway, she mentioned she might be interested in having some landscaping work done, and I gave her your number. I hope that's okay? Tessa Heron, Miles Heron's wife. That's fine. I managed, keeping my voice steady. I appreciate the referral. She seemed particularly interested in rose gardens. I told her about the beautiful work you did with ours. Rose gardens. How fitting. I'll give her a call, I said. Thanks again, Mrs. Walsh. I hung up and stared at my phone, wondering if this was coincidence or something else. In my experience, there were very few true coincidences in the world. Most of the time, what looked like chance was actually pattern, if you knew how to see it. Tessa Heron wanted to talk about roses. Maybe it was time we had that conversation. I finished my pruning and went inside to shower and change. Nora had already left for work. Another early morning meeting, she'd said, though I now knew her meetings with Miles rarely involved conference rooms or quarterly reports. By 9:30, I was parked outside the Heron estate on Maple Street, studying the house where Miles Heron's wife lived. It was impressive, Georgian colonial, probably built in the 1920s, sitting on at least 2 acres of professionally maintained grounds, the kind of house that whispered old money and established power. I rang the doorbell and waited, listening to the sound of footsteps on hardwood floors. The woman who answered the door was not what I'd expected. From the society page photos, Tessa Heron had looked like a typical corporate wife. Polished, decorative, probably more concerned with charity galas than anything of substance. But the woman standing in front of me had intelligent eyes and a firm handshake, and she studied me with the kind of careful attention I recognized from my own mirror. Mr. Mercer, she said, thank you for coming so quickly. Mrs. Heron, I understand you're interested in rose gardens. Something flickered across her face. Amusement, maybe, or recognition. Among other things, please come in. She led me through a foyer that probably cost more than my annual salary, past oil paintings and antique furniture that belonged in a museum, but I wasn't here to admire her interior decorator's taste. Coffee? She asked, gesturing toward a sitting room that overlooked the back garden. Please? She poured from a silver service that looked like it had been in her family for generations. Everything about the house spoke of inherited wealth, the kind of money that went back several generations, which made me wonder what a woman like Tessa Relin had seen in a corporate climber like Miles Heron. Janet Walsh speaks very highly of your work, Tessa said, settling into a chair across from me. She says you have a particular talent for roses. I do my best, I said carefully. What kind of garden did you have in mind? Something dramatic, something that makes a statement. She sipped her coffee, watching me over the rim of her cup. I'm particularly fond of varieties that bloom on schedule. Reliability is so important, don't you think? Absolutely. There's nothing worse than a plant that doesn't perform as expected. Exactly. She set down her cup and leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Mr. Mercer, do you believe in coincidence? The question caught me off guard, though I tried not to show it. Not usually. In my experience, most things happen for a reason. I agree. For instance, it's probably not a coincidence that Janet Walsh mentioned you just days after I learned some very interesting information about my husband's business practices. My heart started beating faster, but I kept my expression neutral. I'm not sure I follow. Of course you don't. But let me ask you something else. When did you first notice the pattern? What pattern? She smiled, and for the first time, I saw steel beneath the socialite polish. The flowers, Mr. Mercer. The Friday flowers that your wife receives from my husband. When did you first realize they weren't about office culture? The coffee cup rattled against the saucer as I set it down. I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Miles has been having an affair with your wife for almost 2 years. I've known about it for 6 months. She leaned back in her chair, completely calm. The question is, what are we going to do about it? I stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. You've known for 6 months? I'm not stupid, Mr. Mercer, despite what my husband thinks. I know about the hotel rooms, the business trips, the expense account charges for restaurants I've never been to. I know about the jewelry he's bought her and the apartment he's considering renting for their little love nest. Then why haven't you left him, confronted him, caused a scene? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because I'm not interested in making things easy for him. Miles thinks he can have his cake and eat it too, keep me from my family's money and connections while he plays house with your wife. He's wrong. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. What do you want from me? Partnership, she said simply. You want your wife back, or at least you want to make her pay for betraying you. I want my husband to lose everything he values, his company, his reputation, his future. We can help each other. I don't understand. Miles is stealing from his own company, Mr. Mercer. Has been for years, but it's gotten worse since he started spending money on your wife. Falsified expense reports, unauthorized bonuses, consulting fees paid to shell companies he controls. I have documentation. My Treasury training kicked in automatically. What kind of documentation? Bank records, email correspondence, receipts, witness statements from employees who've been pressured to sign off on questionable transactions. Enough to interest the Securities and Exchange Commission, I'd imagine. You've been investigating your own husband? I've been protecting my interests. My family's money built Harren Industries, Mr. Mercer. My trust fund provided the initial capital. My father's connections opened the doors that made Miles successful. I'll be damned if I'm going to let him steal it all to impress his mistress. I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb everything she'd told me. Why me? Why not just turn him in yourself? Because I need someone with the right background to help me present the evidence properly, someone who understands financial crimes and knows how to build a case that will stick. She smiled again, and this time it was genuine. Janet Walsh mentioned you used to work for the Treasury Department, Financial Crimes Division, wasn't it? How did you... I do my research, Mr. Mercer, just like you've been doing yours, I'd imagine. She was right, of course. I had been researching, digging, following the same instincts that had made me good at my old job, and now I was sitting across from a woman who was offering me exactly what I needed to make Miles Heron pay for what he'd done. What kind of partnership are you proposing? I asked. You help me build a case against Miles that will result in criminal charges and civil penalties. I help you expose your wife's role in his schemes and make sure she faces consequences too. She leaned forward again. Because she's not just sleeping with him, Mr. Mercer. She's helping him steal. What do you mean? The falsified expense reports I mentioned. Your wife's signature is on most of them. The shell companies receiving consulting fees. She helped set up the bank accounts. The unauthorized bonuses. She processed the paperwork. Tessa's voice was cold, clinical. Nora isn't just Miles's mistress. She's his accomplice. I felt the room spinning around me. You have proof of this? I have everything. The question is whether you're willing to use it. I thought about the pension documents I'd found on Nora's computer, the secret bank account, the divorce consultation. I thought about 18 months of lies and Friday flowers and text messages that made me feel sick to my stomach. What would happen to her? I asked. If we do this right, criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, civil liability for the money she helped steal, professional disgrace that will make it impossible for her to work in corporate finance again. Tessa's expression softened slightly. I'm not interested in destroying an innocent woman, Mr. Mercer, but your wife isn't innocent. She was right. Whatever Nora had been when I married her, she wasn't innocent anymore. She'd made her choices, just like Miles had made his. Now it was time for me to make mine. When do we start? I asked. Tessa smiled, and for the first time since I'd walked into her house, she looked genuinely pleased. How about right now? I have something I think you'll find very interesting. She led me to a home office that was bigger than my entire first floor. The walls were lined with law books and financial journals, and there was a computer set up that looked like it belonged in a government intelligence agency. "I told you I do my research," she said, gesturing toward a filing cabinet that took up most of one wall. "Miles thinks I spend my days planning charity luncheons and getting my nails done. He has no idea I've been documenting his crimes for the better part of a year." She pulled out a thick folder and set it on the desk between us. Bank records showing transfers from Harren Industries accounts to personal accounts controlled by Miles. Email chains discussing how to disguise personal expenses as business costs. Receipts for jewelry, hotel rooms, and restaurant meals that were charged to the company credit card. I opened the folder and started reading. What I saw made my Treasury investigator instincts sing with recognition. This wasn't just an affair, it was a systematic looting of corporate assets, disguised as legitimate business expenses. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. "Conservative estimate? About $2 million over the past 3 years. But it's accelerated significantly since your wife joined the company." $2 million. Enough to trigger federal prosecution, enough to result in serious prison time, enough to destroy Miles Harren's life just as thoroughly as he destroyed my marriage. "There's something else," Tessa said, pulling out another folder. "Something I think you'll find particularly interesting." This folder contained copies of documents I recognized: pension plan summaries, retirement account statements, investment portfolios, my financial information, obtained somehow by Miles and Nora. "They've been planning this for months," Tessa explained. "Miles wants to leave his wife, me, but he needs startup capital for his new life. Your pension money, combined with what he's already stolen from the company, would give him enough to disappear and start over somewhere else. With Nora. Who would conveniently be divorced and available, having taken half of everything you own in the settlement." I stared at the documents, feeling that cold, hard thing in my chest grow larger. They hadn't just betrayed me, they'd planned to rob me blind and leave me with nothing. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Help me present this evidence to the right people in the right way. You know how federal prosecutors think, how to structure a case that will get their attention. I have the documentation, but I need someone who understands the system." "And in return?" "In return, we make sure your wife faces the same consequences as my husband. No plea bargains, no reduced charges, no walking away to start fresh somewhere else." She closed the folders and looked at me directly. "They wanted to destroy our lives, Mr. Mercer. I think it's time we returned the favor." I thought about Nora sleeping beside me, lying to my face, planning my financial ruin while she pretended to love me. I thought about Miles Heron sending her flowers every Friday, marking his territory like an animal. "When do we start?" I asked. "How about with a phone call?" Tessa reached for her phone. "I have a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office, someone who specializes in corporate fraud cases." As she dialed, I looked out the window at her perfectly manicured garden. Everything was neat, orderly, controlled. Just like the trap we were about to set for Miles Heron and my wife. The Friday flowers were about to stop arriving, and that was just the beginning. The U.S. Attorney's Office occupied 3 floors of a federal building downtown, the kind of place where careers were made and destroyed with equal efficiency. I'd been there before, during my Treasury days, but always as an investigator presenting evidence, never as a victim seeking justice. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chen was exactly what you'd expect from a federal prosecutor. Sharp suit, sharper mind, and the kind of focused intensity that made witnesses confess before she'd finished asking the question. She listened to our presentation without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad that she kept angled away from our view. "Interesting case," she said when we finished. "But I have to ask, Mrs. Heron, why didn't you come forward sooner?" Tessa had anticipated the question. "I wanted to make sure I had enough evidence to guarantee convictions. My husband is well connected, Ms. Chen. He has expensive lawyers and political friends. I didn't want to give him any opportunity to wiggle out of the consequences." "And Mr. Mercer, you're comfortable with your wife potentially facing criminal charges?" The question hit harder than I'd expected. "She made her choices," I said. "I'm just making sure she lives with the consequences." Chen nodded, flipping through the documents we'd brought. "This is solid work, very thorough. I'm particularly interested in these shell company transactions. That shows clear intent to defraud." "How long before you can move forward?" Tessa asked. "Federal cases take time to build properly. I'll need to convene a grand jury, issue subpoenas, conduct interviews. We're looking at 6 months minimum before indictments, probably longer." 6 months. 6 more months of pretending I didn't know about the affair. 6 more months of Friday flowers and fake smiles and lies over dinner. "Is there anything we can do to speed up the process?" I asked. Chen smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Actually, there might be. If we could get one of them to flip on the other, provide additional evidence, testify about the scheme, we could move much faster. You want us to wear a wire? Tessa asked. Nothing that dramatic. But if either of you could document additional criminal activity, record conversations that show consciousness of guilt, or obtain evidence we haven't seen yet, it would strengthen the case considerably. I thought about the cloning device connected to Nora's phone, the real-time access I had to her communications with Miles. I might be able to help with that. Good. But be careful. If they suspect you're investigating them, they'll destroy evidence and possibly flee. We need them to feel secure until we're ready to move. After the meeting, Tessa and I sat in her car in the federal building's parking garage, planning our next steps. 6 months is a long time to maintain the charade, she said. I can handle it. The question is whether you can. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mr. Mercer, I've been married to Miles for 12 years. I've had plenty of practice pretending to be someone I'm not. What's your story? I mean, why did you marry him in the first place? She was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the concrete walls of the parking garage. I was young and stupid and impressed by his ambition. My father thought he was a good investment, someone who could grow the family business and provide grandchildren. It took me a few years to realize that Miles saw me as an investment too. When did things go wrong? Probably from the beginning, but I didn't want to admit it. The affair started about 5 years ago. Your wife isn't his first, just his most serious. I kept thinking he'd grow out of it, that success would satisfy whatever was driving him to take these risks. But it didn't. It made him worse, more reckless, more entitled. He started to believe he was untouchable. She turned to look at me. What about you? When did you know about your wife? Consciously. Last Friday, when I finally looked at her phone. But subconsciously, I think I've known for months, maybe longer. The flowers were a nice touch, very romantic. Every Friday for 18 months, like clockwork. Miles always did like his routines. She started the car. Speaking of which, I have an idea about how we might speed up Ms. Chen's timeline. What kind of idea? The kind that involves giving Miles and your wife exactly what they think they want. She drove me back to my car, and we made plans to meet again the following week. As I watched her drive away, I realized how much my life had changed in the space of a single morning. 24 hours ago, I'd been a betrayed husband with no clear path forward. Now I was part of a federal investigation that could send my wife to prison. The thought should have bothered me more than it did. That evening, Nora came home with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine, claiming she wanted to celebrate a successful presentation to the board of directors. Miles was really impressed, she said, unpacking containers of lo mein and sweet and sour pork. He said I might be in line for a promotion. That's great, I said, wondering what she'd actually done to earn Miles's approval. What kind of promotion? Senior finance manager. It would mean a significant salary increase, maybe even stock options. Stock options in a company that was about to be investigated for fraud. How convenient. When would this happen? I asked. Soon, I hope. Miles said he wants to restructure the department, bring in people he can trust to handle sensitive projects. People like her? People who are willing to help him steal from his own company in exchange for money and attention and Friday flowers? That sounds like a great opportunity, I said, pouring wine for both of us. It really is. And the timing couldn't be better. We could use the extra income. We, as if she was planning to stay married to me long enough to spend the money she'd earn helping Miles Heron commit fraud. Have I mentioned how proud I am of you? I asked, raising my glass in a toast. She smiled, the same smile that had made me fall in love with her 8 years ago. I love you too, Evan. The lie came so easily, so naturally, that I almost believed she meant it. Almost. After dinner, she disappeared into the bedroom with her laptop, claiming she had work to finish. I cleaned up the kitchen and retreated to my office, where I connected to the clone of her phone and checked her recent activity. New messages from Miles, more explicit than usual. Photos of lingerie he wanted her to wear. Details about a weekend trip he was planning for them, disguised as a business conference in Chicago. Instructions about expense reports that needed to be filed and receipts that needed to be lost. But there was something new, too. Messages about me, about our marriage, our finances, our future. When are you going to tell him? Miles had written. Soon, Nora had replied. I want to wait until after the promotion is finalized. Make sure I'm financially secure. What about his pension money? Already working on it. My lawyer says I can claim half of everything in the divorce, including retirement accounts. Perfect. We'll have enough to disappear for a while, let things cool down. Disappear? Just temporarily. I'm thinking Europe, maybe South America, somewhere we can start fresh while the lawyers sort out the details. I stared at the screen, feeling that familiar cold sensation in my chest. They weren't just planning to steal my money, they were planning to flee the country with it. But Sarah Chen had been right about one thing. People who thought they were getting away with crimes often got careless, and careless people made mistakes. I opened a new document and began typing, documenting every message, every plan, every detail of their scheme. By the time I finished, I had enough evidence to interest prosecutors in multiple jurisdictions. Miles Heron thought he was smarter than everyone around him. He thought he could steal millions of dollars, destroy 2 marriages, and disappear into the sunset with my wife and my money. He was about to learn how wrong he was. But first, I had a phone call to make. Mrs. Heron, it's Evan Mercer. I think it's time we accelerated our timeline. What's happened? They're planning to run, and they're planning to take everything with them when they do. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a sound that might have been laughter. Well, Tessa said finally, I suppose that changes things, doesn't it? It changes everything. Good. I was getting tired of waiting anyway. As I hung up the phone, I heard Nora moving around in the bedroom, getting ready for bed. In a few minutes, she'd come looking for me, probably with some story about being tired or having an early meeting tomorrow. She'd kiss me goodnight and lie down beside me, and I'd listen to her breathe while she dreamed about her new life with Miles Heron. But her dreams were about to become nightmares, and I was going to enjoy every minute of it. The Friday flowers had been arriving for 78 weeks. They were about to stop forever. 3 weeks later, I was trimming roses in my backyard when the first domino fell. It was a Tuesday morning, unusually warm for late March, and I was tending the climbing variety along our back fence. The thorns were especially sharp this year, nicking my thumb as I worked to shape them into something beautiful. My phone rang at exactly 9:15. Mr. Mercer, this is Sarah Chen. We need to move faster than anticipated. I set down my pruning shears and walked toward the house, away from any neighbors who might be listening. What's happened? Your wife and Miles Heron have accelerated their timeline. Our surveillance shows they've booked flights to Switzerland for this Friday. We think they are planning to disappear. Switzerland, a country with strict banking privacy laws and no extradition treaty for financial crimes. They'd done their research. How much time do we have? I asked. 48 hours, maybe less. I need you and Mrs. Heron to come in this afternoon. We're going to execute search warrants Thursday morning, and I want to make sure we have everything we need. After I hung up, I called Tessa. She answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting. It's time, I said. I know. Miles came home last night talking about a business trip to Europe. Said he might be gone for several weeks. Her voice was calm, controlled. He asked me to have his passport ready. Are you ready for this? Mr. Mercer, I've been ready for this since the day I found out about his first affair. The question is whether you're ready. I looked through the kitchen window at the crystal vase on the counter, where last Friday's orchids were beginning to wilt. In 2 days, they'd be replaced by fresh flowers, assuming Miles Heron was still in the country to send them. I'm ready, I said. That afternoon, Tessa and I met with Sarah Chen and a team of federal agents who looked like they could bench press small cars. The conference room table was covered with documents, photographs, and evidence bags containing everything from computer hard drives to hotel receipts. Here's how this is going to work, Chen said, addressing the room like a general briefing her troops. Thursday morning at 6 a.m., we execute simultaneous search warrants at Harren Industries, the Heron residence, and the Mercer residence. We arrest Miles Heron and Nora Mercer on federal fraud charges. We freeze all bank accounts associated with the scheme, including personal accounts. What about the Switzerland trip? I asked. Their passports will be flagged. If they try to leave the country before we arrest them, they'll be detained at the airport. She smiled grimly. Either way, they're not going anywhere. Agent Rodriguez, a compact man with intelligent eyes, leaned forward. Mr. Mercer, we need you to act completely normal between now and Thursday morning. Go to work, come home, have dinner with your wife. Don't do anything that might make her suspicious. What if she asks about the passport, or wants to discuss travel plans? Play dumb. Act like you don't know anything about any trip. Chen consulted her notes. Mrs. Heron, same instructions for you. Business as usual until we make the arrests. What happens after? Tessa asked. Arraignment, probably Friday afternoon. Bail hearing early next week, though given the flight risk, I doubt they'll get bail. Chen closed her folder. If everything goes according to plan, they'll be in federal custody by Thursday evening. As we left the federal building, Tessa and I walked in silence to the parking garage. The weight of what was about to happen hung between us like a physical presence. Any regrets? She asked as we reached our cars. I thought about the question seriously. In 48 hours, my wife would be under arrest. My marriage would be over, my life would be turned upside down, and everything I'd built over the past 6 years would be destroyed. No, I said finally. No regrets. Good, because after Thursday, there's no going back. She was right, of course. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but Miles and Nora had crossed that line first, 18 months ago, when they'd decided my marriage and her trust fund were acceptable casualties in their love story. Wednesday evening was surreal. Nora came home from work carrying a small suitcase, claiming she needed to pack for a business trip. Where are you going? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Switzerland. Miles wants me to attend a conference in Zurich, meet with some potential investors. She was folding clothes into the suitcase, including the lingerie Miles had bought her. It's a great opportunity. How long will you be gone? A week, maybe 2? Depends on how the meetings go. 2 weeks. Long enough to establish residency, open bank accounts, and disappear into the Swiss financial system with my pension money and whatever they'd stolen from Harren Industries. That sounds exciting, I said. I'll miss you. She looked up from her packing, and for a moment her expression softened. I'll miss you too. It might have been the first honest thing she'd said to me in months. That night, she fell asleep quickly, probably exhausted from planning her escape. I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathe, thinking about the federal agents who were probably conducting final briefings, checking equipment, preparing for tomorrow's raids. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to my office. The clone of Nora's phone showed a flurry of activity, final messages between her and Miles, confirmation of their flight times, instructions about what to do if anything went wrong. If we get separated, meet me at the bank in Zurich, Miles had written. Account information is in the safe deposit box. What if someone tries to stop us? Nora had replied. Nobody knows what we're doing. We've been careful. They had been careful, I had to admit. If not for Tessa's investigation and my Treasury background, they might have succeeded. They might have disappeared with millions of dollars, leaving their spouses to deal with the wreckage. But careful wasn't the same as smart, and smart people didn't underestimate their opponents. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold, with the kind of drizzle that made everything look dreary. I was awake before my alarm, showered and dressed by 5:30. Nora was still sleeping, her face peaceful in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains. At exactly 6 a.m., my doorbell rang. I answered it in my bathrobe, trying to look surprised as Agent Rodriguez and 3 other federal agents showed me their badges and search warrant. Evan Mercer, we have a warrant to search these premises in connection with a federal fraud investigation. I don't understand, I said, loud enough for Nora to hear from the bedroom. What kind of investigation? Sir, we're going to need you to step aside while we execute this warrant. Nora appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing one of my old t-shirts, her hair messy from sleep. Evan, what's going on? Federal agents, I called up to her. They have a search warrant. The color drained from her face as the reality of the situation hit her. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. Nora Mercer? Agent Rodriguez was already climbing the stairs. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. There's been a mistake, she said, backing toward our bedroom. I haven't done anything wrong. Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I watched from the bottom of the stairs as they handcuffed my wife, the woman I'd loved for 8 years, the woman who'd planned to steal my life savings and disappear to Switzerland with her lover. She looked down at me as they led her past, her eyes wide with shock and fear. Evan, she said, call a lawyer, please. I'll see what I can do, I lied. 20 minutes later, she was gone, loaded into the back of a federal vehicle and driven away to face arraignment on charges that could send her to prison for 20 years. I spent the rest of the morning watching federal agents search my house, photographing documents, seizing computers, treating me like a victim rather than a suspect, which technically I was. At noon, Agent Rodriguez found me in the kitchen, staring at the wilted orchids on the counter. Mr. Mercer, I thought you'd want to know. We arrested Miles Heron at his office this morning. He's in federal custody. What about the Switzerland trip? Canceled permanently. Rodriguez smiled. He won't be sending any more flowers. After the agents left, I walked through my house, surveying the damage. They'd been thorough but respectful, leaving everything more or less where they'd found it. The only real change was the absence of Nora's presence. Her clothes, her computer, her phone, all seized as evidence. And the orchids on the kitchen counter, which I finally threw in the garbage where they belonged. That evening, I called Tessa. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Better than I expected. You?" Miles tried to call me from jail. I didn't answer. She paused. "The house feels different without him. Cleaner somehow." "I know what you mean." Sarah Chen called this afternoon. The arraignment is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 p.m. She doesn't think either of them will get bail. Good. We talked for a few more minutes, comparing notes on the day's events, making plans for the legal proceedings ahead. When I hung up, I realized something had changed. The cold, hard thing that had been sitting in my chest for weeks was gone, replaced by something that felt almost like peace. Justice wasn't complete yet. There would be trials, sentencing, appeals, years of legal proceedings. But the immediate threat was over. Miles and Nora were in custody. Their assets were frozen. Their plans were destroyed. The Friday flowers would never arrive again. I poured myself a glass of wine and walked out to my garden, where the roses were beginning to show their spring growth. With proper care and attention, they'd bloom beautifully this year. Some varieties might need to be pruned more severely than others, cut back to healthy wood so they could grow stronger. But that was the thing about gardens. Sometimes you had to cut away the diseased parts to save the whole plant. Sometimes destruction was just another word for renewal. As I stood there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the roses I'd planted and tended and shaped with my own hands, I realized I was looking forward to Friday. For the first time in 78 weeks, it would be just another day, and that was exactly how I wanted it.